Hello and welcome to yet another interesting conversation on the sidelines of the Raisina Dialogue, and welcome to Newsline Plus at the Raisina Dialogue 2023. Well, apart from the many issues that are being discussed at the Raisina, one important issue is of terrorism, but also about the situation in South Asia vis-a-vis security. We've seen the Taliban takeover of Kabul. We've also seen TTP being reactivated in Pakistan amidst the political slugfest within Pakistan, a complete economic breakdown as well. And apart from that, of course, India also taking over the G20 and a host of other issues being discussed in the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And today, we have two interesting guests that are joining us. Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow of the ORF, Mariam Wardak, a very well-known Afghan political commentator. Mariam, if I can begin with you, how do you see the situation in Afghanistan unfolding 18 months after the Taliban takeover? We've seen, girls being completely denied their education, basic human rights being denied. There are several videos that come out on and off about the discrimination that are being faced by the Hazaras as well. It does seem that the Haqqani network and the Taliban are completely territorially in control. But what are the ramifications for the common civilians there? And in the months ahead, do you see, the two factions within the Haqqani network and the Taliban, continuing the way they have till now, or do we see further breakdown?
Okay, well, I would like to emphasize that we are in the third anniversary of the Doha Agreement. The Doha Agreement had 4 components. One of the components was troop withdrawal, reducing violence, intra-Afghan negotiation, which did not take place. There was one other component, but none of the components emphasized on women's rights or women's education. The US withdrawal was hasty, unprofessional, and emotional for the Afghan population. This was not a surprise to me. The Taliban never wanted to talk about Afghan issues and what they're on Afghan women issues, what they were going to do for education or the rights of women. So I had projected that they were going to step back. How they were going to step back and when they were going to place was quite sooner than expected, and I believe that had to do. It was triggered by the protests that had come against the Taliban taking over in the initial days. I feel that the Taliban oppress women every time they are squeezed from the outside in any way. And I think that that's wrong. I believe that the Taliban are very good at being isolated and living in isolation. So pressuring them to continue to live in isolation by any other sanctions or limiting aid is the wrong thing to do because that is their comfort zone. But exposing them and bringing them into communication and dialogue and putting them in hot seats is what could probably challenge their thinking. In regards to terror links, the Taliban are 2 fractions. You have the moderate, which was the Doha side, and then you have the Haqqani side. I believe that the Haqqani side is pretty much what is implementing on setting back all the rights for women. I believe that the Doha side is trying to be a more progressive side. I do hear on the ground that the foot soldiers are very shocked and unhappy with the decisions that are made for women. That's not something that they wanted. That's not what they fought for, they say. They want their wives or sisters to be out in the public sphere, obviously within moderation and under the umbrella of Islam. Another aspect is that we also understand the majority of these people are illiterate. In the past 20 years, they've been in isolation. They don't know how to read and write, most of them. The ones that do know are the ones who are exposed to international outlets and international. It's how we approach them and how we go. I think Sushant is better to talk about the terrorism aspect. I'm only focusing on the international engagement aspect and what's happening to the women. And I think we've all witnessed that the Taliban are now starting to get unofficial recognition by allowing the diplomats in 11 countries to take over the embassies. And this is not a surprise. I think back-channel diplomacy has been taking on for a long time. I think what I really would like is a push for the US to really do whatever engagement possible. Stop cutting aid to Afghanistan. Don't limit the aid to Afghanistan because they're pushing a whole society into famine. And that's the number one concern for me. I understand that education is serious, but if we have a society that's dying, education is number 2 for me in that aspect.
Well, taking cue from what Mariam said, particularly on the US policy, I want to focus my question to you, Sushant. about the Indian policy and the American policy on Afghanistan. Is America going to look the other way continuously? Because it does seem that the entire narrative and the focus and the strategy has changed from Afghanistan to Russia and Ukraine, and all its energy is going into what's been happening in Ukraine. So, is whatever surrender that happened at that time in August, has Americans completely forgotten Afghanistan at this stage? And what about the Indian policy? Because Pakistan at many levels had thought that this was a strategic depth for them, as we discussed earlier as well. But Indians seem to be creating inroads with the Taliban.
Okay, so I think if you look at the American policy, it was much before even the Doha agreements that the American national security strategy had said that the focus and the centrality of the strategic policy is no longer terrorism. It's going to be countries like Russia and China. I don't remember the exact date, but I think it was 2017, 2018, thereabouts. So that shift had already come in how the Americans were viewing the world. So they vacated Afghanistan, and that time Ukraine had not happened, but the China factor was now reigning supreme. The contestation in Indo-Pacific was at the center of the American policy, and then of course Ukraine happened. So now it's a dual focus. It's Russia, Ukraine at one level, and it's the Indo-Pacific strategy at another level. The Americans are not taking their eyes off this ball. It's not as though terrorism is no longer an issue. It is, but it does not have the same salience that it had from 2001 to 2021, right? It's moved from there. And it's now more of if you find a terrorist or you have a clear shot, you take it. Otherwise, you deal with it in a very ad hoc kind of a manner. There's no grand strategy to deal with terrorism anymore. So that is as far as the American strategy is concerned. And we could have a lot of problems with that because in some ways, at least I personally think that terrorism is a strategic challenge. Terrorism is something, you can call it terrorism, you can call it radical Islamism, you can call it by whatever name you want to call it. But this is something which is only growing. Now, if you look at the trajectory of its growth from 2001 to today, you look at the number of areas these guys are present in, the number of organizations that have spawned, and all these organizations share a common ideology. Their worldview is similar. They might have different organizations, they might have different sectarian and doctrinal affiliations, but at the heart of it, I think there is a certain unity or a certain mindset which is driving all of them. And to my mind, that becomes a strategic challenge because then you're talking about over 1 billion people, 1.5 billion people. And I'm not saying everybody subscribes to that ideology, but that's the catchment area. So I think that's a problem, and you really should not take your eye off that ball, especially because some very critical areas of international security, especially in the Middle East, are a part of this entire calculus. So, but I can't tell the Americans what their policy should be. As far as India is concerned, I think when the Taliban takeover happened, there were a lot of people in India, for example, who used to say that, okay, fine, now India is out, right? India is the big loser. India has been ousted, etc., etc. There was this whole narrative which was created. And my point even then was that there is never any end game in Afghanistan. Every end game is the beginning of a new great game. And it didn't take, last time it took us 5 years to get back into Afghanistan, and we never actually left Afghanistan because we were always aligned to the Northern Alliance and some of the other players. And this time, within a year, we are back in. Now, maybe we are back in holding our noses, right? But there are, and even though I might not like the Taliban, but I can understand where the government of India is coming from. There are certain strategic compulsions, and maybe that is the reason why they're going back into Afghanistan. I do have a problem with what I might call the abandonment of our friends in Afghanistan at one level, and I think I do have an issue with that. uh, and I personally think that even though we were opening lines of communication with the Taliban for whatever reasons, we should not have abandoned some of our friends. And I personally feel we should still reach out to those people, because the fact that we've opened up, channels of communication with the Taliban puts us in a better position to help out some of our friends out of the predicament in which they are caught in Afghanistan. And I think we should step up to the plate on that count. But other than that, uh, India is back in Afghanistan. If we are not back in a big way, it is because we are holding ourselves back. Part of the reason is, that there's no international consensus on how to deal with the Taliban, at what status they need to be given. That is one part of it. The other part of it, that I think there's a bit of a wait and watch, wait and see kind of an approach on how far we are willing to go with the Taliban dispensation, which I dare say, as of now at least, uh, is firmly in power. I don't think there's any real challenge to them right now. Economically, also, the Afghanistan under the Taliban is not a welfare state. They are not in the business of building up infrastructure, providing hospitals. You know what a normal state does. It's a very different kind of a state structure which they are building up. So from that point of view, they can even stay in isolation. If they get a couple of $1 billion in terms of revenue every year, they're good to go. Uh, the problem, however, will be for the Pakistanis, and frankly, I think that's divine justice, because I think what the Pakistanis have done to Afghanistan over the last almost 50 years now is unconscionable and unpardonable. They have destroyed Afghanistan not once, not twice, but many times over. And I think what is extremely significant is that you will hardly find an Afghan who has even a single good word to say about Pakistan. Even the Afghans who had taken refuge in Pakistan hate the Pakistanis. And there's a reason for that, because the Pakistanis have done to Afghanistan which no country should do to another one, right? Uh, so, so a lot of what is happening against Pakistan is, call it divine justice, poetic justice, put whatever label you want to do on it. You call it by the Urdu term makafate amal, that the consequences of your own actions. That is happening now. If the TTP is attacking Pakistan, there's a reason for it, and that is that the TTP comes from the same ideological stream that has given rise to the Taliban. They're part and parcel of the same amalgam, right? Uh, and this, at one level, is an expansionist ideology. And Pakistan is again a natural area for them to expand into. So I think this thing is not going to go away anytime soon. Within Pakistan, there's a fair degree of ambivalence when it comes to the Taliban, both the Pakistani and the Afghan variety. They still continue to play this game of good versus bad Taliban. Uh, Despite the fact that it's turned out to be an extremely expensive proposition for them, they continue to maintain that fiction. So a lot of what is happening in Pakistan was something which was always going to happen. Anybody who thought that the Taliban will forget the years of indignities that were visited upon many of them when they had taken refuge in Pakistan, that the Taliban will simply forget about it and not bother about it. That's not happening. And what I fear and suspect is that the Pakistanis now might be tempted to play similar games with the Taliban by trying to use certain factionalism within the Taliban uh, and try and maximize it, which will be a mistake, because that factionalism is like any big political organization. There are different factions contending for power and all of that. It hasn't descended into internecine warfare as of now. Number one. Number two, I think there are not just two factions. There are multiple factions. Even within the moderates and the hardliners, there are multiple factions. There are hardliners, who are ready to compromise on certain things and not on other things. There are other hardliners who are not ready to compromise on anything. So there, it's I, to my mind, I would say there are at least 4, maybe 5, even 6 factions which are currently there in the Taliban. And each one is trying to, pull things and push things in their way. And where the final equilibrium is struck is anybody's guess. But it's not going to be an easy ride going forward for anybody in Afghanistan.
Well, I want to take that back to Mariam. And Mariam, he spoke at length about the Taliban and the TTP. How would you characterize the relationship currently between the Taliban and Pakistan government? Because, for a very long time, when the US had its boots in Afghanistan, we saw Haqqani network and the Taliban being given a safe haven, by Pakistan. And Pakistan perhaps was the happiest when Kabul Taliban takeover of Kabul actually took place, and we saw that image of the ISI chief in the hotel with a cup of tea. But things seem to have completely changed now. Did Pakistan see this as a strategic depth victory for them, and perhaps saw this as Taliban being puppets of Pakistan, in months and years to come? And was this what is happening today? Perhaps a realization that Taliban has a territorial control. It has a complete sovereign right about the territory, and it is not going to listen to any of the foreign powers, be it the US, somebody in the Middle East, or Pakistanis. How would you characterize this relationship now?
I think there's a misperception that many Afghans fall as puppets, whether that is the Afghan government as puppets for the US or the Afghan Taliban as puppets for Pakistan. I think the Afghan Taliban took refuge in Pakistan because that's the only place they took refuge. But as soon as they realized that they were able to interact in other nations such as Qatar or Iran, they took refuge there too. So Pakistan having this misconception, thinking that they can control a group that can run a neighboring country, is wrong, especially when one reflects on Afghanistan's history. Currently, it's very evident that the Taliban are sending a strong signal to all countries that we want to operate as a sovereign country and we want to engage with others. So Mullah Omar's son, Mullah Yaqub, calling on India to train his soldiers, I think, is a direct communication to Pakistan saying we are going to operate in the best interests of our people and what we think is the best way forward. So there's always going to be a turbulent relationship with Afghanistan and Pakistan. They are our neighbor. We need to be in communication with them. I think being at odds with them is going to hurt Afghanistan more than anything. Finding a moderate line of communication, a modern line of operation is very important. And as Sushant mentioned, we have a lot of refugees in Afghanistan, and we have to consider that. It works also, it's one of the sidelines when you have refugees in that country, that those refugees start to operate and start thinking like the host country themselves, whether that's Iran, whether that's Pakistan. That's why when you have these refugees return to Afghanistan, Afghanistan has also lost some links of its own culture. They bring the culture of those nations back into Afghanistan. And that sometimes there is a loyalty concern. Am I loyal to the country that my ancestors are known for, or am I loyal to the country that took us host? There's so many layers and issues, and I think that they were also taken advantage of by Pakistan, for instance, for the safe havens that they've created. And now I think one of the things that we really have to follow is monitor how Pakistan is going to interact with Afghanistan, monitor how the Taliban are going to engage with its neighboring countries, and monitoring the fact that is Afghanistan going to be another hub for potential terrorists. We do hear so many incidents that they're ISIS returning and trying to take safe havens in Afghanistan, etc. So these are things that we really need to highlight, and I think that this is going to be detrimental to the Afghan society at large.
Mariam, I want to take this forward and ask you about the different statements that have been coming from the Taliban, statements as well as videos. One section completely trying to mock Pakistanis. You saw that tweet where one of the senior leaders from the Doha office actually put out that 1971 Pakistani surrender before the Indian army, and saying that cautioning Pakistan that you don't try to provoke us because this would be the end result. Then videos surfacing from the Taliban asking Bilawal to get into shape and not provoke look at the economic downturn in Pakistan and not give lectures to Afghanistan. On the other side, videos also coming out and statements coming out, reaching out to India, not just for humanitarian aid, but also trade. Now, most of the bilateral ties globally, at the heart of it is trade, is economics. Do you think that is the deeper realization that Taliban has, that in the initial years of their power, they want to put their stronghold and care about their people, and trade and economics would be at the center of it?
I really hope that's the case. I think that they've also come to realization that they really need to engage with everybody else and not the only country that hosted them and also caused a lot of problems with them. There's so many underlying messages, and I don't think I'm one to be able to speak on this. Maybe Sushant would be best to answer that question, but I think that the Taliban having realization that they need to engage with other countries for whatever potential reason in the best interest of its people is a positive sign for me. But we also have to understand that they are also harming their own people. So everything with the Taliban is so extreme. However many factions, if I believe 2 or Sushant believes 5 or 6, the point is that the best interest should be the Afghan people forward. And currently that best interest is only half. And if they want to bring economic stability, I'm for it. If they want to engage with India for economic stability, I'm for it. But that economic stability has to move forward in helping also Afghan women raise up in the sense of having basic access to education, basic access to healthcare, basic access to job opportunities. I think many of us look at Afghanistan from where we're sitting. So when we're sitting in a democracy and we're sitting in a free country, we are thinking, oh, well, Afghanistan should be this way. No, Afghanistan was a landfill of just assassinations, murder, killings. Many women have become now the leaders, are the champions, the matriarchs of their homes, and they're not allowed to work, and they have multiple children or multiple mouths to feed. And the fact that many of them have been handicapped and now they have to ask for assistance or support, that's very hard on the Afghan women. That's psychologically harming, physically harming on multiple levels. So I think that we all need to take all of this into consideration when we think about Afghanistan. We should think about stability, we should think about education, we should think about economic infrastructure, all of this.
Finally, Sushant, how do you see the future of Pakistan? We see an economic collapse completely, even though China has now sanctioned a loan. We see political instability happening. Security, you spoke about how the TTP is active again, and bomb blasts and attacks are completely rampant. How do you see the immediate future? Even though for Indians it is a cause of concern, whatever happens in India's neighborhood.
Why?
It should be a concern.
Why?
I mean, we are a direct victims of terrorism, and whatever happens there bothers us.
So, if your enemy is self-destructing, why are you so concerned about them? What's wrong with you?
So how do you analyze what's been happening in Pakistan?
Like, you people, I don't know, this suddenly Mother India complex comes into all of you guys. I don't know why. And you are a sufferer of terrorism, so, and you also have to give in to, this virtue signaling. I hope you don't cut this part.
Yeah.
Because I need to take you on this. But look, one second, I need to say something on the Afghanistan bit before I come to Pakistan. I think it is very important for us to understand one of the layers which Mariam was talking about, is that no matter how totalitarian and authoritarian a regime might be, even that regime needs a certain level of endorsement from the people of that country. Okay? Now, sometimes the endorsement comes because you're providing social and public goods. But other times it comes because you are not compromising on the pride of the people. That one image of the ISI chief sipping tea in Kabul like the Fateh Kabul was utterly destructive to Taliban Pakistan relations.
Yeah.
And the fact that Afghans across the board, Taliban, non-Taliban, Pashtun, non-Pashtun, you name it, there is a visceral dislike for Pakistan. Okay? And I think it is important for the Taliban to show that they have their own agency and they are not agents of Pakistan. And they will have to do certain things to disprove that perception among a lot of people. I think always keep that factor in mind. And the old wisdom, as it used to go, it's a bit of a cliche, but the old wisdom was that you can rent an Afghan, you can never buy an Afghan. The Pakistanis try to think that they bought them over. So I think that's a fatal mistake which they have made. So that will have consequences. On Pakistan itself, uh, look, everything which is happening in Pakistan, they brought it upon themselves. Uh, the security situation, we've already spoken about it. I don't see it getting any better. There'll be an ebb and flow, but I think the trajectory of events is suggests that it will only be negative for Pakistan. I don't see how they are going to be able to get over this, because at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, the Taliban is an ideological movement. You know, if it was an existential, it was a movement which was this worldly, and not otherworldly, uh, it would have compromised long back. But the fact is that because the fundamental driving force of the Taliban movement is an ideological strain within that movement, that ideological strain cannot but be in conflict with what Pakistan stands for, unless Pakistan accepts that same thing. So there is a fundamental inherent conflict built into that relationship, which will manifest itself partly in ways it is manifesting itself right now, and partly in new ways going forward. So the security situation, at least on the Western front, is not going to improve. That does not mean that there will be no trade. That does not mean that there will not be many other things which will happen. But that will not be the primary driver of the relationship. Number one. Number two, so one is that security situation remains disturbed. The second is the economic crisis. And I think to understand how deep the economic crisis is, you need to start looking at the numbers. How deeply the structural problems of the Pakistan economy are not going to be fixed by the Chinese rolling over their debt or taking back their money and then giving it back to the Pakistanis at even higher rates of interest. That 1 billion, 2 billion, even $5 billion is like water off a duck's back. It's not going to resolve the fundamental crisis of the Pakistan economy. It might buy them some space, some time for the next couple of months, so that the Pakistani elite can live it up. They can siphon off whatever new money comes, so that when the collapse finally comes, they don't lose anything. All of that will happen. It does not fix the fundamental problem of the Pakistani state. So I think there is a kind of a secular decline which is underway, and nobody seems to have any clear idea on how to fix it, how to arrest that decline first, and then how to fix it. I don't think there is a lot of appetite, at least till now. I don't know what might happen tomorrow. I'm not a soothsayer or a clairvoyant. But I suspect that there is not a whole lot of appetite to plow money into Pakistan and give them a free pass again. I think a lot of people are insisting that Pakistan undertake deep structural reform, which is extremely painful, extremely painful. It is painful to the point of death. I'm not very sure if the Pakistanis have that appetite. So I personally don't see a good times for them. Even if they were to arrest this decline, it would take them 4 to 5 years, right? And 4 to 5 years is a very, very long time when things are moving as fast as they are moving. So I personally don't see very good times ahead for Pakistan. I think that gives India a major opportunity in terms of both increasing the gap between us and Pakistan, number one. Increase that gap not only in terms of economy and other stuff, that's important, but in terms of capabilities and capacities, in terms of the power differentials, and take it to a point where the Pakistanis cease to be a nuisance, which they've always been. And it increases your capabilities to hit back where it hurts if the Pakistanis were to indulge in adventurism, in the future. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for us. I just hope we don't give in to what you have been giving into your Mother India complex and, you know, okay, let us see what we can do about Pakistan. I think we should desist from doing that, and we should not go down that road. I think there's something deeply satisfying in seeing an enemy, atrophy or even implode. But of course, we need to be mindful that there will be some consequences which will visit us as well. We need to game those consequences. We need to prepare our fallback options. We need to prepare our plan A's and plan B's. But we should not disturb an enemy who is drowning.
That is exactly what I meant. I meant that how well are we prepared to tackle any
So
eventuality?
you should ask the questions in a way that, you know, it doesn't sound that you are Mother India.
I'll take care next time. Thank you so much, Sushant and Mariam.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for joining us.